Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 26 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, again, thanks to those of you who have written in. I very much appreciate it. Thanks especially to Jeffrey Simonson, who wrote in and said that he had put a link from his photo gallery website to Camera Position, and he'd made a little graphical button and asked me if I wouldn't mind making a button. And so I have made a button for Camera Position. If you wanted to put a little graphical link on any web page that you have, you will find that now on the cameraposition.com blog page. So thanks, Jeffrey, for your support, and really appreciate those of you who've spread the word, and I know that there are more people listening this week than there were last week, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate those of you who have been sticking with me, and hopefully you're learning some things about the way you are an image maker, and I know I continue to learn things about the way I am an image maker, and talking about these things certainly helps. And today I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about another one of my favorite photographers, and I have used one of his images in a previous podcast, but Edward Weston should need very little introduction to most fine art photographers. Weston, the sort of quintessential artist photographer, an American born and raised in the Chicago suburbs, but almost immediately moved out to the West Coast, and certainly is well known for his West Coast aesthetic, and really contributing to that entire West Coast aesthetic by contributing to the group F64 group that, of course, included Ansel Adams and Morley Bear and Imogen Cunningham and a wide variety of other folks. But what I wanted to talk about with regard to Edward Weston today is his use of the edges of the camera frame. One of the things that I've always been really floored by in terms of his work and the way in which he used the edges of those frames. And the edges really are used by Weston in his photographs to define how we see the subject. And one of my favorite images for this is the image that, if you're looking at this podcast in iTunes or on the web, you're seeing this image now. It's a photograph of a mushroom. And first of all, just on a sort of wonderfully curious level, Weston gives us this sort of Alice in Wonderland kind of a view where we're underneath the mushroom. Even though we know that it's probably unlikely that the camera is underneath the mushroom, we certainly get a sort of ant's eye view of this mushroom, and the light, I think, contributes a lot to that feeling, that textural quality of the light that's coming from this sort of unusual looking angle. But really where I'm most interested in talking about this image is the way in which Weston uses the edges of the frame to talk about the way we see this circular form. Now, we know what a mushroom looks like. As viewers of this photograph, it's not like we need to be told that a mushroom is circular in shape, or at least this particular type of mushroom has a circular type shape. But what Weston has done is placed the edge of the frame very carefully, very different amounts from the edge of the mushroom. So what we get is a real change in the way in which we perceive this shape. The top edge of the frame is barely skirting the edge of the mushroom ever so slightly. The right side of the frame cuts into the mushroom just a little bit more. The left edge of the frame cuts in quite a bit, and then the bottom edge cuts in quite a whole lot. And what Weston's doing is he's using a concept in the visual arts called gestalt. The gestalt theory suggests that our brains are in fact really quite well organized, and that they tend to be self-organizing, and that what we do as we look at things in the visual world is that we complete things in our mind whether we're given all the facts or not. And so what Weston's doing is allowing our mind, really forcing our mind, to work harder to look at this particular image by not giving us every piece of the image or every piece of the subject. He's forcing us to complete the circle in our mind's eye rather than by our actual eyes in our head. So our mind has to do the work to complete that circular shape. And part of what makes Weston's work so remarkable, and if you look at his body of work, you will find this repeated in lots of his photographs. This real sense that what we're looking at isn't entirely shown to us, and that he's using the edges of the frame to help us define for our own selves how we see the subject. Another photograph that I like to look at relative to this is a photograph of Weston's son Neil, his nude torso. And this particular picture, where Weston's drawn his lines at the edge of the frame, really does an incredibly beautiful job of showing us the undulating lines of this boy's torso and the way in which the idea of how he's placed the left and right boundaries of the frame changes the way we see this body. And in fact, and if you listen to the previous couple of podcasts ago talking about Stieglitz's steerage image, this particular photograph has that same sort of quality, that the center of the image is almost completely empty, and yet the edges of the image really are where the image content is contained, and it's that intersection of body and background, or what we would call the intersection of positive and negative space. Some more art school terminology here. The positive space in this picture being the torso, the negative space being the space around the torso, those black shapes, and how beautiful those blank spaces are on either side of the torso, and the way that boundary of the frame creates a visual excitement as we create those beautiful negative shapes on either side of Neil's torso. So the idea here is to think about the edges of the frame. In my, again, my day job as a college photography teacher, I frequently give an assignment to students to go photograph the edges. And I don't give them a whole lot more than that. I kind of just leave it hanging and see what they come up with. But eventually, as we talk about the assignment in subsequent weeks, and I usually give them a little bit of time to work on these things, I talk about looking at the edges of the frame and how the edges of the frame are defined, and how the edges of the frame help us to see the subject of a photograph. So the idea here is, as you're making your photographs, be aware of the edges of the frame. Be cognizant of the way in which the edges of that frame impinge on your subject and crop it out. I often talk about the idea that photographers are not creators, they're editors. Our job is to start with the entire world and get rid of all the stuff that doesn't matter. So as you do that, you've got to draw some boundaries, and you've got to draw some edges of the frame. So as you're thinking about those edges and figuring out where those edges are, think about how those edges impact the overall visual effect of your image. Well, thanks again for listening to Camera Position. I greatly appreciate your presence. Those of you who have subscribed, I very much appreciate that. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.